Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. Okay, devotees, all right. Who has access to my calendar? Okay. I see. Okay. And Mahaprabhu Kripa.
I'm not sure about that.
Anyway, I'll find out later. Right, so devotees, welcome to the 14th evening program of Bhakti Vaibhava. First of all, let us start with our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadeshatarane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So devotees, welcome, nice to be here with you. We are in the 4th chapter of the first canto. So we are making some progress step by step. What did we do last night? We got up, we did the first section, didn't we? Up to and including verse 8? Yes, right. Up to and including verse 8. So let us move on, beginning with verse 9. Let's just run through what are the sections again. What we did last night, section A, verses 1 to 8, was Shonaka asks questions. And what we're going to do tonight, I mean, maybe we'll do more also, but at least we'll do section B from verse 9 to verse 13. Shonaka asks about Maharaj Parikshit. Then section C is verse 14 to verse 25. Vyas supervises the dividing of the Vedas. And I don't know, maybe we'll make a start on that. We'll see how it goes. Or maybe not too. We'll see. But then section D, the last section, is Vyasa's dissatisfaction and the arrival of Narada. And that's verses 26 to 33. Right, so here we are then. Going into section B, he means Shonaka. Shonaka asks about Maharaj Parikshit. Right, so let's see, what did I do? Yeah, okay. So verse 9, it is said, this is Shonaka speaking, it is said that Maharaj Parikshit is a great first-class devotee of the Lord, and that his birth and activities are all wonderful. Please tell us about him. Right, so, yeah, the beginning of coming to understand further who is Maharaj Parikshit, what is his background, what is his nature. Yes, so there's purport there. So, of course, there's so many things about Maharaj Parikshit which are wonderful, just really amazing. Like, for example, that he, of course, along with Shukadev, who's also wonderful, but Maharaj Parikshit, he sat there for 7 days and 7 nights, no eating, no sleeping, and just simply heard Srimad Bhagavatam from Shukadev Goswami. That's wonderful. What a devotee who could do something like that. Nowadays, I don't really think anyone could, certainly not happily, like it's nectar, like we're having a wonderful time. But that was his experience. It was just ecstatic, simply ecstatic, from beginning to end. So that's wonderful. But the first thing that's wonderful is that when he was just in the womb of his mother, Uttara, he was attacked by the Brahmastra of Ashvatthama. He, and I was just reading today, I think it must have been the 8th chapter. I'm making notes, trying to move forward as fast as I can. So I think it was in the 8th chapter, Srila Prabhupada makes the point a couple of times that Ashvatthama was not just trying to kill Parikshit within the womb. He wanted to kill the 5 Pandavas also. And in other words, wipe out the dynasty. Then who would rule? Who knows? That's really hard to say. But this is wonderful about Maharaj Parikshit, that he was attacked by Ashvatthama in the womb, but the really wonderful thing is he was protected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the womb. That's really something. The Supreme Lord entered the womb and protected him from this weapon. We'll discuss it further in, it's actually chapter 7. It's actually chapter 7, yeah, where Prabhupada says this about Ashvatthama trying to kill not just Parikshit, but all the Pandava brothers. So Prabhupada goes at some lengths. He describes what's a Brahmastra and what it can do and how it compares to modern day, particularly nuclear weapons and these types of things. Well, specifically those things, actually. And the really important, in this regard, really important point he makes is that this weapon, even though it has the power to destroy a planet completely, which no nuclear weapon nowadays could do, and it can destroy more than one planet. It can even destroy the universe. It's just so incredibly powerful. But it's such a refined weapon that in this particular case, it could be directed against a child within the womb and kill the child within the womb without harming the mother. Hare Krishna. That's just very amazing. Yeah. So that's wonderful about Maharaj Parikshit, because Maharaj Parikshit is the subject of the discussion at the moment for the next 4 or 5 verses or something. So, and then there's another thing too, another wonderful thing. His activities are also wonderful because he chastised Kali. There's a whole chapter dedicated to that further on in this first canto, and just give us some weeks or months before the end of the year at least, and we'll go through that chapter. So he chastised Kali, who was attempting to kill a cow and a bull, and was just harassing them and harming them so horribly and heartlessly. So Prabhupada makes the point here in the purport. It's really such a powerful point. To kill cows means to end human civilization. I take that to mean maybe not so much that the human species is going to be sort of physically eliminated or something like that, but the quality of humanity, of the human society, will be destroyed. And so humanity will cease to be human in terms of qualities and natures, and they'll become Purusha Pashu, man-animals. Animals by activity, by consciousness, by quality, by characteristics, animals who just happen to inhabit human bodies. Yeah, but the human body becomes more or less incidental, because the actual person is not living as a human being, but is actually living as an animal. So Maharaj Parikshit then was wonderful, because he wanted to protect the cow. And not just he wanted, but he did. And he was ready to destroy Kali. Yes, so then the next point is wonderful. Maharaj Parikshit is wonderful. His death is wonderful. And, we mentioned him sitting there and hearing the Bhagavatam 7 days, 7 nights, no eating, no sleeping, and like that. So that's wonderful. But what is also wonderful is that he did that to prepare for death, to meet death in the best way possible. Not just the best way possible, but actually the right way, to guarantee back home, back to Godhead, perfection of life. And he wasn't scared. So many people, if death faces them in the eyes, they'll become very frightened, like in wars. You know, fortunately, I missed the Second World War. And the Vietnam War came. In New Zealand, they drafted young people, but not all of them. They would choose the birth dates. They didn't choose my birth date. So I didn't have to go to Vietnam or, you know, that sort of thing. But it's really, to be in war is very frightening, to be face to face with death. But Maharaj Parikshit was not at all worried. And I imagine you've seen the back cover, is it, or front cover of the 12th canto. And the picture there is Maharaj Parikshit. He's just sitting there, cross-legged. He has been bitten by the snake bird, Takshaka, and his body has burst into flame. In other words, he's in the process of leaving his body. But he is not in anxiety. He's just fixed in Krishna consciousness. Yeah. So, and just a little side point, you know, you're not going to be asked about this, but just as a matter of interest, generally poisons are considered, you know, as like, not, well, you could say weapons to kill, but as things that kill. Poisons are in the category of fire. Yeah. Poisons are in the category of fire, generally. So, anyway, it's just a little side point. But Maharaj Parikshit was not in anxiety, and in fact, after he was cursed, the same day, then the father of the boy who cursed him, Shamaka Rishi, came and informed Maharaj Parikshit that my son has cursed you to die in 7 days by the bite of a snake bird, and, you know, this is really terrible, and I just really apologize, but I can remove the curse. Do you want me to remove the curse? And Maharaj Parikshit says, no, don't remove it. And it's not some sort of death wish or, you know, suicidal tendency or some sort of madness. But he explains that this has come upon me, you know, unknowingly. This is the will of the Lord. So seeing it's the will of the Lord for my betterment, he could see I'm too materially attached. So he wanted to force me to become serious and come to him. So he's arranged this. So don't remove the curse, I will accept. And that's what he did. So it's wonderful. It's all wonderful. So Srila Prabhupada discusses all these points or makes note of them and concludes by saying, so everything about him, Maharaj Parikshit, is wonderful, and his activities are worth hearing attentively. The desire is expressed herein to hear about him in detail from Shonaka, of course. So, well, actually, we should have read all the verses, shouldn't we? You know, I'm going to just, anyway, we looked at that one. I'm going to read the verses. So that was 9. Here's 10. He was a great emperor. He, Maharaj Parikshit, was a great emperor and possessed all the opulences of his acquired kingdom. He was so exalted that he was increasing the prestige of the Pandu dynasty. Why did he give up everything to sit down on the bank of the Ganges and fast until death? Well, it's another question. Just happens to be specifically about Maharaj Parikshit, so separated these verses out from the first 8. Verse 11, he was such a great emperor that all his enemies would come and bow down at his feet and surrender all their wealth for their own benefit. He was full of youth and strength, and he possessed kingly opulences that were difficult to give up. Why did he want to give up everything, including his life? I mean, that's a good question. And of course, there's a good answer to it, but it really is a good question. Verse 12, those who are devoted to the cause of the personality of Godhead live only for the welfare, development, and happiness of others. They do not live for any selfish interest. So even though the Emperor Parikshit was free from all attachment to worldly possessions, how could he give up his mortal body, which was the shelter for others? That's, this very interesting perspective. Shonaka, he's really tuned in, very amazing. Verse 13. We know that you are expert in the meaning of all subjects, except some portions of the Vedas. And thus you can clearly explain the answers to all the questions we have just put to you. Right. So, there you go. There's the translations of the rest of the actual verses. So let's get back there to verse 10. He was a great emperor and possessed all the opulences of his acquired kingdom. He was so exalted that he was increasing the prestige of the Pandu dynasty. Why did he give up everything to sit down on the bank of the Ganges and fast until death? So, yes. Anyway, okay, let's look at the purport. So first of all, Prabhupada points out the very, what would you say, fortunate, I guess, but very opportune situation of Maharaj Parikshit. Unlike so many, unlike his uncle Yudhisthira, he didn't have to fight or do anything to get a kingdom. He didn't have to do a thing. He just inherited it. Just like that. He got it. Everything was just laid out for him. Whereas Yudhisthira, the Pandavas, but Yudhisthira became the actual king. What they went through. What they went through to get the kingdom. I was just reading today, going through, which was it anyway, either chapter 8 or 9. Chapter 8, 9. Anyway, chapter 8 or 9, but I think it was chapter 8 or 9, that Maharaj Yudhisthira was thinking, we don't need to have the battle. Duryodhana is doing a good job, because Duryodhana despite being anti-Krishna, Duryodhana was extremely competent as an administrator and a manager, as a ruler. He was, apart from the lack of God consciousness, he was doing an excellent job. So Yudhisthira was feeling that, it's not necessary to do this, to have this battle. But then still he went ahead and organized things to have the battle simply because he knew it's the right thing. It's the right thing. My father was, father, not Yamaraj, that father, but the father, of the family, Pandu. He was the king, and so I have to become the king. I don't really have a choice. I have to do it, just as a matter of duty. So therefore, the Battle of Kurukshetra happened, just on that basis. Yeah, so interesting point. So, but anyway, Parikshit, he just inherited it. Yes. So that was one thing. So, there's a logic there. Why did he give up everything to sit down on the bank of the Ganges and fast when he was doing his duty very nicely and looking after the people very nicely? Where was it? Was it just now? That anyway, yes. Well, we mentioned how Yudhisthira, just as a matter of duty, he engaged in the battle just because it was right. So Maharaj Parikshit, the same logic can be used with him, that he has a duty to protect the people who are dependent on him. He has a duty to keep ruling. Just like Yudhisthira felt he had a duty. He had to rule, not because he wanted a kingdom, but because he had a duty. It was the right thing to do. So it was the right thing for Maharaj Parikshit to live on and keep ruling, no less than it was Yudhisthira's duty. The right thing for him to do. It was the right thing for Parikshit also to do. So that's another reason for questioning. Why did he give up everything, including his duty and giving shelter? His duty means giving shelter to humanity. How could he give that up and fast to death? It seems a contradiction. Plus a consideration that he was doing well in the administration. Yeah, well, that's there. But he was worthy of the good names of his forefathers. His forefathers, the Pandava brothers, particularly Yudhisthira, they're such good and honorable people. And he has a duty to uphold, you could say to uphold their good name, which, to some degree is true. But he has a duty to uphold their duty, to continue the duty of looking after their kingdom. you could say, to some degree, you could say, on their behalf. Not exactly on their behalf, but carrying forward the family responsibility. So therefore, it's perplexing to Shonaka. How could he take such a drastic step as giving everything up and sitting down on the bank of the Ganges to fast till death? It seems, considering the nature of the family and his nature, the nature of his immediate forefathers, he can't figure it out. So Prabhupada makes the point that there was nothing undesirable in his opulence and administration, so there was no need for him to feel frustrated that, things are not working out. I'm trying to rule the kingdom, but it's just, there's so many problems and opposition, and it's just too much, and I want out. There's nothing like that. And this is a piece of useless information, some of you may know, the Prime Minister of England just resigned today, I think today or last night. And there's just so much scandal and just so much rubbish that he did. It's just incredible. So he had really good reason to resign and just get out, because the situation was just completely ridiculous. Of course, he doesn't feel like that because it's Kali Yuga. And Kali Yuga does things like that to people. It really does things like that to people. So, but for Maharaj Parikshit, he had nothing to be frustrated about or upset about. Everything was just really wonderful. His family situation was wonderful, and just everything was wonderful. So it's all astonishing. Right. And verse 11. He was such a great emperor that all his enemies would come and bow down at his feet and surrender all their wealth for their own benefit. He was full of youth and strength, and he possessed kingly opulences that were difficult to give up. Why did he want to give up everything, including his life? It's really amazing, actually. It is truly amazing. So again, in the paragraph is Prabhupada sort of revisiting these points we just made, basically. One point we didn't touch on, so it's a different point, but it's a very important point. All his enemies would come and bow down at his feet and surrender all their wealth for their own benefit. Means that, at least partially, that they would feel, that those people would feel it's good. Not just, okay, you can take my wealth. All right, I won't stop you. Not just like that, but like, please take it. Please take my wealth. Of course, he didn't take all their wealth. He just took some fraction, I forget. I don't know, maybe it's 25%. I know the Kshatriya kings would take 25, just a flat 25% of the income of the Vaishyas. flat 25%. No, different levels depending on your income. But a flat 25% the Kshatriya kings would take. And it may be that the emperors would take a flat 25% from all the kings who were under them. Because Maharaj Parikshit was emperor, he was not just king. We refer to him as Maharaj Parikshit. Maharaj, at least traditionally, shastrically, generally speaking, not always, but generally, it means king. It's a synonym for king, or translates to king. So, but Maharaj Parikshit, he was king of kings. He was the king of kings. He was the emperor. And he was governing not just the people, but he was governing the people, but also through the kings, by managing the kings. So, yeah, but those kings, some of them would fight with him. He conquered his enemies, Prabhupada says. But many of them would just voluntarily and happily hand over wealth, because he was such a good emperor, such a good emperor. They were just really happy to work under him. Yes. So he was a young man, he could enjoy life. There was no question of retiring from active life. There was no difficulty in collecting the state taxes, because he was so powerful and chivalrous that even his enemies would come to him and bow down at his feet and surrender all wealth for their own benefit. Yes. So there was tremendous prosperity. And again, it comes back to his duties to the people, that because of his good rule, there was great prosperity and opulence. There was enough milk, grains, and metals. They didn't have to use sunflower oil when cooking for the devotees. They didn't have to, they just used ghee. Maybe they used sunflower. Prabhupada actually said, I was told, ghee is for the inside, oil is for the outside of the body. Yeah. And even I remember, I've said this a number of times, when I was in England, we never used oil. They do now, I believe, but we just used ghee. Even when we were on traveling Sankirtan, living in a van, we used butter, actually. Okay, anyway, so there was just so much facility of all sorts, really just all sorts. And all the rivers and mountains were full of potency to produce gems and, whatever. So materially everything was satisfactory. There's no question of untimely giving up his kingdom and life. And his wife, well, actually, I don't even know about if he had multiple wives, as was often the case, or one wife, or what was the situation. But as I understand, he had just a really wonderful wife. Yeah, really wonderful wife. So yes, in principle, it's the same. These are the same types of points that we made about the previous verse. Okay, let's go on to verse 12. Those who are devoted to the cause of the personality of Godhead live only for the wonderment and happiness of others. They do not live for any selfish interest. So even though the Emperor Parikshit was free from all attachment to worldly possessions, how could he give up his mortal body, which was the shelter for others? Well, actually, we already mentioned that point, didn't we? So, so there you go. If nothing else, what Shonaka is getting at is that it could be said that Maharaj Parikshit is being negligent in his duties to others, who, without him doing his duties, they're just really life is going to be very difficult for them without that shelter. Right, so now, here, for at least the first half or something along those lines, it's a description of Maharaj Parikshit in the purport. Prabhupada's just giving a description. So let's just read what Prabhupada says. Parikshit Maharaj was an ideal king and householder because he was a devotee of the personality of Godhead. A devotee of the Lord automatically has all good qualifications. And the emperor was a typical example of this. Personally, he had no attachment for all the worldly opulences in his possession. But since he was king for the all-round welfare of his citizens, he was always busy in the welfare work of the public, not only for this life, but also for the next. He would not allow slaughterhouses or killing of cows. He was not a foolish and partial administrator who would arrange for the protection of one living being and allow another to be killed. Well, we can just say a word or two about that. That Srila Prabhupada was in Mauritius, where there's something like 50% Hindu population, not just Indian, but actually Hindu. And, in their Mauritian ways, they take their Hinduism very seriously. So Prabhupada initially was kind of impressed or, hopeful that something could be done with the country, with the whole country, like make a Krishna-conscious country. And whoever was the prime minister at the time was extremely friendly and favorable towards ISKCON. So Prabhupada was quite hopeful. But then one day, if I remember correctly, Prabhupada was to have a meeting with the Prime Minister, but it got cancelled because the Prime Minister had some appointment he had to go to. And Prabhupada asked, what was the appointment? And I think it was he had to go and open a chicken farm. Hare Krishna. And Prabhupada, he was really not happy about that at all. So, and then also, there's the story of Maharaj Shibi. You may be familiar with that story. Maharaj Shibi was another pious king, And one day a pigeon approached him. Pigeon was being chased by a hawk. And the pigeon approached Shibi Maharaj and said, "Please protect me. I am one of the praja. I am one of the citizens. And you're the king, you must protect me." And Maharaj Shibi said, "Fine, I'll do it." So he stopped the hawk from killing the pigeon. But then the hawk said, "I am also one of your praja, and I am carnivorous. I can't eat, I don't eat anything else. And this is what I've chosen to eat today. So you have to give me shelter too. So you should hand the pigeon over." And Shibi was caught. But then Shibi said, "No problem." He got a balancing weighing scale, put the pigeon on one side, and started cutting flesh off his own body to the weight of the pigeon, except the pigeon started getting heavier. So he was just about finished. And then the pigeon and the hawk revealed themselves as, I think, Agni and Indra. They were testing him, and he passed the test. And then they made his body whole again. So, I mean, Prabhupada talks about this story, and it really illustrates the point that's being made here, that the king is the protector of the citizens. He really is. And it's such a major responsibility. So how could Parikshit give up this responsibility? How could he do it? It just seems, unthinkable that someone, the grandson of the Pandavas, could do such a thing, abandon his duty and sort of, not exactly commit suicide, but something along those lines. So yes, no slaughterhouses, no killing of cows. He wouldn't arrange for the protection of one living being and allow another to be killed. Because he was a devotee of the Lord, he knew perfectly well how to conduct his administration for everyone's happiness. Men, animals, plants, even plants, and all living creatures. He was not selfishly interested. Selfishness is either self-centered or self-extended. He was neither. Self-centered means just for me. What I feel is good for me. That's self-centered. Self-extended means what's good for my group, which could mean my family, it could mean my country, some grouping which I'm a member of, helping, seeing what's good for my group, extended selfishness. So he was neither. His interest was to please the Supreme Truth, the personality of Godhead. And then Prabhupada sort of kind of broadens things, not just about Parikshit, but in a broader sense about kings. So he was neither, Parikshit. His interest was to please the Supreme Truth, personality of Godhead. And then Prabhupada talks about the king. King as representative of the Lord. So the king's interest must be identical with that of the Lord. The Lord wants all living beings to be obedient to him and thereby become happy. Means everyone, the Supreme Lord wants everyone to become a devotee because it's the only way to become happy. If you're just in it for yourself, you're not going, or your group, in the end, you're not going to be happy. So, therefore, the king's interest is to guide all subjects back to the kingdom of God. So the king then has to see that the citizens are coordinated. Their lives are coordinated, so they go back to Godhead. And just for example, coordinated, yeah. Maharaj Yudhisthira, when he was ruling, he would sometimes do demigod worship, like regular demigod worship. And the reason was not because he felt that we don't need to make Krishna like the sole center of our lives, but because there were people in the kingdom who couldn't come to the standard of Krishna consciousness. So for them, they should at least, they shouldn't become atheists or just crude materialists. At least let them worship the demigods and be materially comfortable. So then they'll be satisfied and sort of basically peaceful. Yes, so coordination, even to do things like that. So, and then, a good king, the kingdom's full of opulence and no need to eat animals, plenty of food grains, milk, fruit, and vegetables, so that the humans and the animals can eat sumptuously to their heart's content. So, and what to say, what to speak of, he has to make sure there are good cooks. So, they're good enough at cooking so people will not want to eat meat. They'll actually really get a higher taste from vegetarian food so that their interest in eating meat will just disappear, or they won't develop such an interest. So all these things, it's complex. Running a kingdom, particularly like Maharaj Parikshit, the whole planet, it's really quite something. So then, if all living beings are satisfied with food and shelter, obey the rules, there won't be disturbance interpersonally, and Emperor Parikshit was a worthy king, and therefore all were happy during his reign. And verse 13. So again, don't forget it's Shaunaka. Shaunaka is speaking to Sutta. And he says, we know that you are expert in the meaning of all subjects, except some portions of the Vedas. And thus you can clearly explain the answers to all the questions we have just put to you. Right. It's an interesting point, isn't it? That you are expert in the meaning of all subjects except some portions of the Vedas. So Prabhupada, of course, in the purport, addresses this important point. So what Shaunaka is referring to is that there is the Karmakandya section of the Vedas, which is all materialistic. Demigod worship, sacrifices of different types for increasing material opulence, going to higher planets, all these types of things which are just strictly material. That's Karmakandya. That's Karmakandya. And there are Brahmins who are expert, or at least there were Brahmins, who were just expert in Karmakandya, just incredibly expert. And they could do these sacrifices in such ways that the people would get whatever they wanted from the sacrifice. It means going back to those days, the Vedic times. Yeah, there were Brahmins who were so expert. And in our Bhagavatam classes here in Radharanath, we've been going through the whole sacrifice of Daksha in all its great detail. And it's a Karmakandya sacrifice, basically. It's that sort of sacrifice. Yeah. So yes, so you get these people, they are just super expert in these materialistic things and successful. They're successful. Someone wants a sacrifice for getting more money, they'll do such a sacrifice, the person will get more money. A sacrifice for the child's education, they'll do a sacrifice, child will get a good education. All these things. And even for going to higher planets. But now Sutta Goswami, he's a Brahmin, but he's not that category of Brahmin. He's a devotee. He's a pure devotee of the Lord. And his only interest is Krishna and going back to Godhead. And his interest is in helping people to do those things. So in the purport you'll see Prabhupada, he refers to the Brahmins who are Vedic and Karmakandya, but then the preachers, Sutta Goswami's in the category of preachers, and Prabhupada uses the term Parivrajakacharyas, learned preachers. So Sutta Goswami is one of them. He's a Parivrajacharya, a learned preacher, devotee. And his business and just what he does and all he does is disseminate transcendental knowledge to everyone. So therefore, Prabhupada makes the point, the Parivrajakacharyas are not always expert in pronouncing the Vedic mantras. Because, again, another sort of technical point, which, they're not going to ask you, but it's just a very interesting point. There are two types of Sanskrit in the Vedic scriptures, and they are sort of fairly distinct from each other. Although they're the same language, but there's some, some significant distinctions, differences. So one is they call Vedic Sanskrit, and particularly the difference I mean, there's some difference in vocabulary and grammar, but it's more meter. Prabhupada mentions here the Vedic mantras, which are practiced systematically by accent and meter by the Brahmins who are meant for administering Vedic rites. So it's very technical. The pronunciations, the meters, the emphasis, in Vedic Sanskrit. But the Sanskrit which we find in our books, it's Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, that is called, at least the scholars call it, classical Sanskrit. And it's somewhat different. I mean, it's not different like English and Afrikaans, but it's definitely different, like English and American English maybe, but somewhat more different, definitely more different. But that gives sort of an idea. But definitely significantly more different than English and American English, which, have quite numerous differences, and people have written books about it, and, it's like that. So the Parivrajakacharyas, because they're preachers, they're trying to help the people become Krishna conscious and go back to Godhead. So they don't take an interest. They just don't involve themselves. And like in the case of Sutta, in the case of some of them at least, they don't even know some of the things. So Prabhupada particularly mentions the Parivrajakacharyas are not always expert in pronouncing the Vedic mantras, the accents, the meters, for doing the Karmakandya rituals. But still, Prabhupada, we're in the first paragraph, Prabhupada makes the point that it should not be considered that the Brahmins are more important than the Parivrajakacharyas, because they're not. Actually, Prabhupada says they're one and different simultaneously. But, ultimately the Parivrajakacharyas are more important, because they're not just trying to fulfill people's material desires. They're trying to help people to go back to Godhead. Even, in the sense of one and different, Prabhupada says that, last sentence in the first paragraph, they're one and different simultaneously because they're meant for the same end in different ways. The thing is, the Karmakandya in those days and of Maharaj Parikshit and before Maharaj Parikshit, the Brahmins generally, even though they teach Karmakandya and do Karmakandya a lot, but they would also teach in such ways that the people who they're doing the sacrifices and pujas for would gradually progress and gradually come to the level of Krishna consciousness. This is a point actually that's made in Bhagavad Gita, that those Brahmins, at least the really qualified ones, they would not take it that our Karmakandya is an end in itself. Karmakandya was one step in a greater process, ultimately going back to Godhead, or helping the people to go back to Godhead. But the Parivrajakacharyas, they simply focused on that. So, if the Brahmins are actually properly situated and ultimately trying to elevate the people to a spiritual level, then what Prabhupada says here applies. That the Brahmins and the Parivrajakacharyas are one and different simultaneously because they're meant for the same end in different ways. They're actually meant, both of them, for taking people back to Godhead. So, okay. Second paragraph. And I guess this is as far as we'll get, which is good. And so Prabhupada makes the point, there's no difference between the Vedic mantras and what's explained in the Puranas and Itihasas. Anyway, of course, that's one way of looking at it. But if you look at the Karma Kandya, then, the Karma Kandya mantras, it's another field and a lower level field of Vedic culture than just the purely transcendental parts. So anyway, Prabhupada makes some interesting points. Jiva Goswami explains that in Madhyandina Shruti, which if it's Shruti, means it is or connected with the four Vedas, because the four Vedas are the Shruti, and the Puranas and Itihasas are the Smriti. Yeah. So they're all emanations from the breathing of the Supreme Lord. And, in one sense, the only differences are that the Vedic mantras mostly begin with pranava omkar, means om. And it requires some training to pronounce the metrical accent, without which the mantras cannot be successfully chanted. This is the Vedic Sanskrit as opposed to classical. So, yes, so their mantras begin with Om, Pranava Omkar. So these people who are really into the four Vedas, if they chant Hare Krishna, they will chant Om Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Like even the mantra in the first verse of the Bhagavatam, right at the beginning of the first verse, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Technically speaking, it's structured as a Vedic mantra and not a sort of Puranic or classical Sanskrit mantra, because Om is there. Yeah, Om is there. And Om in that context, and this is another thing I'm sure, I assume you're not going to be asked about. Om, the presence of Om there, it's called a Bij mantra, the Om. And the actual mantra is Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, and which is a statement. Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, I offer my obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Vasudev. It's a very straightforward, short, very short sentence. And the Om is really speaking, it's a bij, it's a seed, or like a step to help you into the mantra. But it's not actually required for what the mantra is stating. Anyway, okay. So yeah, the Vedic mantras from the four Vedas and their corollaries means the Samhitas, Brahmanas, and the Aranyakas and Upanishads. That's Shruti. That's all Shruti. Vedic, strictly Vedic, the four Vedas. So their mantras begin Om. And the Paravrat, they're like Puranic mantras, they don't. Like we just chant Hare Krishna. So, although Sutta was a preacher, like a high-level preacher of the first order, the best, he didn't bother much about getting into, how do we chant these mantras properly? Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So, and Prabhupada makes the point, it doesn't mean that the Vedic mantras are more important than Srimad Bhagavatam. Actually, they're not. Srimad Bhagavatam's the ripened fruit of the Vedic scriptures, and so it's the topmost, the ripened fruit. Like the difference between, an unripe fruit and a ripe fruit. Like mangoes. Unripe mangoes are good for achar. They're good for chutney. They're not so good for just eating. Yeah. So, yes. And on top of that, Shukadev is so into Bhagavatam, and Bhagavatam in and of itself means that the perfection of life. The Vedic literatures mean, as long as they're taught properly, means part of a step-by-step process to the perfection. But oftentimes people just get caught on the Karmakandya level. Okay, let's see. So Prabhupada says that besides the Srimad Bhagavatam being the ripened fruit of all the Vedas, the most perfectly liberated soul, Srila Shukadev Goswami, is absorbed in the studies of the Bhagavatam. Although he's already self-realized. He's already self-realized, but he's absorbed in the Bhagavatam. And Sutta Goswami is following in his footsteps. And therefore, Sutta's position, Shukadev's position, both of them are not the least less important, just because they're not expert in chanting Vedic mantras with metric pronunciation. Prabhupada's talked about that 3 times now, 4 times even, 3 or 4 times. Yeah, which depends more on practice than actual realization. Realization is more important than parrot-like chanting. So there you go, devotees. That's the second section. And on Monday, we will go into the third section. From verse 14 to verse 25, Vyas supervises the dividing of the Vedas. Yeah. And we'll see how far we'll get. Anyway, we'll do our best to go through this actual section C. I'm sure we'll get through it. And maybe we'll do the last section on Monday too. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hari Bol.